what's your definition of code switching?
My definition of code switching, actually, it's been evolutionary. I remember as a teacher talking about it with my students when they would write, but I didn't call it code switching. I would tell them the way you speak, for example, to your grandparents may be different than the way you speak to your friends. And it's the same thing in the way that we write in here. And that's what you're going to learn while you're in here in my class. A colleague of mine was the first person who said it's called code switching.
Oh my God!
I thought, oh, okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Hi, Global students. This is Dr. R. Guess what? I am here with Miss Amy Sanchez-Martinez. She's the principal at Sand Creek High School in Colorado Springs.
Yes.
And we're just here having a conversation with her. I'm excited. Even though you guys really can't see my face, I am just so over the moon about having this conversation with this beautiful woman. I have to tell you personally that every conversation, even though they've probably been so small, have been so monumental to me, because you've made such an impression in such a short amount of time. And so I'm so impressed about everything that you're doing at Sand Creek. And what I wanted to mention is that, and I have my notes here just kind of remembering, I love your open door policy. I love that students can actually come into your office and have those hard conversations. And then sometimes maybe it's not a hard conversation, but maybe they just need a familiar place to come that they feel safe. And I'm loving that. I had that when I was in high school, when I was growing up in Baltimore, Maryland. And I had the best principal ever, and she was like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, good, bad, and different. For me, it was always bad. It was never good. But she always kept that open door policy. And so I just want to talk about that for a little bit. Why do you think that open door policy is important?
As the leader of a community, first off, they need to see what I'm doing. They need to see that I'm there for them, that I'm there to partner with families. And I use that word very intentionally. We partner together, right? The students spend more waking hours with us at school than they do at home.
True.
And so because of that, I want to make sure that people know that we're partners. When you're a partner with someone, you don't always have to make an appointment. You've got to be able to walk in and have those needs served in the moment, because things happen, things come up, and life is busy. Same thing with students. I was really happy the other day, Dr. R, because there was a group of students, they came, they stood outside the door, and I was having a conversation with someone else. They waited, and they wanted to talk about something serious. They wanted to talk about bias. They wanted to talk about how they felt singled out. And they said, Miss Sanchez, the only person who we think that can understand right now is you. They said that's not to say anything bad about anybody else, but they knew that there was a sense of empathy there. And I definitely wasn't expecting that conversation to happen. But I knew that if the door was shut and the blinds were closed, we would never be able to have that type of conversation, even if I built capacity with them in the hallways or in the classroom. We have to be able to address those things in the moment. And so I'm really happy that you've noticed that and that you've seen that. And I'm so glad that our families know each other now.
I'm going to ask this question. I've been code switching since I was 15 years old. I started code switching unbeknownst when I was working at Johns Hopkins Hospital as a volunteer. And one of the things that we needed to do, we welcome back the following summer. We had to have a rapport with everyone, the doctors, the nurses, the staff. And so for me, again, because I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, I remember just going in and falling on my face like 105 times, and my language was completely off. And so this African-American young man came up to me and he was saying, come here. He was like, come here, Renee. He said, I'm just going to talk to you for a minute. And so he said, you're going to have to change your language. He didn't say code switching, but he said, when you're in certain arenas, you're going to have to change your language. He said, I'm not asking you to be someone different. He said, but if you want to, come back and or make an impression, he said, sometimes you have your city language, and he said, but then you have to develop a professional language. When did you start code switching?
When I was a child. Because, and here's the reason why. So my parents are from two different cultural backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so my mom is a Denver native, and she's, both her parents, my grandparents, are from the Midwest.
Wow.
And we're of Scotch-Irish background, but from hundreds and hundreds of years back. And so they would speak in a certain way and act in a certain way. And my dad grew up here in Springs, but his background is Chicano. I mean, he's from a little tiny ranch, small town in southern Colorado that our family's been there since it was Mexico. Since it was Mexico, my family was there. Okay. And so, for example, my great-grandmother never learned how to speak English. Right. Even though she was born, raised, and died in Colorado, she never spoke English. Wow. But there was a certain way that each side of the family communicated. And as a child, I remember not knowing any different, that when I was with my mom's family, I'd end up using certain words or saying certain things. And with my dad's family, certain words and certain things, or even certain mannerisms, body language. Exactly. And so I remember that consciously at one point, that there were certain things that I would say with my mom's family that when I'd go with my dad's family, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Exactly. So I became conscious of it at an early age, but like you said, not knowing that it was code switching until much further on in my life. But ever since I was little, I remember it.
I've been told by many people, well, you speak white, or you're acting white. Yep. And so for me, I don't really understand what that means. What I understand is that I'm speaking in a professional way. I'm speaking in a way that's going to, help me to possibly open a door for my children and her children, and then also even for the global students who are, viewing this video. Experience any ostracism based on code switching?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So, of course, as you learn and you grow, and as you and I talked about, you become more self-aware of surroundings. And as I grew in my career, and I would start to be able to serve families in a new way, I remember one time in particular at my former school, I was working with a family whose daughter was in crisis. The parents didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do. And so I was aware of that when I came into this situation with them. But of course, when people are frustrated, they'll say some things that maybe they wouldn't be apt to say otherwise. And I remember specifically one time the mother, because we would spend hours at a time together trying to work on solutions for their daughter. Okay. And she spoke in particular, she says, wow, I really don't like the way you talk. She's telling me in Spanish. I don't like the way you talk. I don't like the way you dress. You think you're fancy in your office here. What? And I thought to myself, like, oh, okay. Wow. So my response was, well, thank you for being honest, but that's not going to bring us a solution right now for your daughter. Sometimes it's things like that. And then afterwards, she would tone it back because I drew a boundary. And then she toned it back after that, and we were able to work on solutions. But she said something specific about the way I spoke. And I worked very hard to be able to communicate professionally in Spanish, because socially I could speak it already, but professionally is yet another skill set. Exactly. And I wanted to show our families in that community, which was primarily Spanish speaking, that I was competent. I wasn't going to be using some language that we would use, for example, in a social setting at a party. Exactly. I would be using professional language, but she took it a whole other direction. Wow. But after that, we ended up coming together and finding some solutions. But that, for me, I thought was an important example to bring up, that it happens in lots of different settings and all over the place, honestly. And I think if each of us were to reflect on it, we could all think of a time when we were ostracized for the way that we speak or the way that we express ourselves, because it doesn't quite fit, in air quotes, what someone may think belongs.
Exactly. Yeah. I've had people say, well, I can hear you all the way down the hall. And I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Then that means that my students can hear me.
That's
and
right.
so at the end of the day, we're pretty good. I mean, so then they're like, okay, all right. And they'll just kind of keep moving on.
Right.
I've been told the same thing. You know, it wasn't a dressed up affair, you know, and I'm thinking it doesn't matter. This is the way that I dress.
That's right.
You know, my
That's
dress
right.
down is my dress down, but when you talk about dressing up, you know, I'm going to definitely dress professional. You said that your former school, it was mostly bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it at Sand Creek? How do you navigate that at Sand Creek?
Yes, so it is a little bit different. I'm enjoying it. I am loving every moment. And as a matter of fact, this morning a friend of mine was talking about it. And I said, there's some days when I wake up or when I'm going home in particular and I think, wow, this is my life. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. It's just a great place. And it's a different layer of diversity at Sand Creek that I love. I love it. But I would say more and more, this year in particular, there are more bilingual families who we're serving.
Okay.
Or something that I noticed with some families is bilingual, you know, in my case it's Spanish, but in other cases as well. Someone who's younger in the family, or maybe what informally is called a representative, which is not necessarily a formal representative by U.S. standards, I think.
Okay.
It's somebody in the family who speaks English.
I understand. Yes.
And so,
Yes.
yeah, and so but they'll say, this is my representative who's here with me today. Because again, by the standards here, if we're thinking about code switching on that level, they think someone will take me seriously if I say I bring a representative with me today.
Wow.
And now I'm glad that we don't have to navigate that in our school, that families can come in just as they are, be served where they're at.
Okay.
Because once we build that sense of comfort, then we can partner in an authentic way and in an authentic relationship. So I use my skills more and more now because I think now people know that somebody's there.
Exactly.
And there's a few of us now that last year I was the only person in our front office space that was bilingual. Okay. And now there's a few of us.
Nice. I was going to ask that. So now, good.
Yep. There's a few of us who are certified and non-certified.
Nice.
Our district is also really great in that they provide translation service. Okay. And I think about a dozen languages. And you just call. You say the language that you need, and somebody's ready right away.
That is wonderful.
It is. So yes, and because it just builds that sense of service, and I want customer service to be our mindset at school, so people feel like they can come and have their needs met, so that their students can learn and grow.
Wow. So whether it's tone, voice, body, mannerisms, habits, pitch. People tell me all the time my facial expressions, you know. So as a woman of color, what barriers have you faced with code switching?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
It's a really good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You did a good job with that.
There are times, and you and I have talked about this just a little bit, just in passing, and that I do feel that there's a different standard for me in the way that I speak, the language that I use, and my facial expressions, my body language, because I'm really expressive, and I notice that I'm doing this, you know.
Okay.
And then I thought, you know what, this is who I am. I just need to embrace it.
Exactly.
This is who I am, and it's okay. Like you said, somebody can hear you down the hallway teaching. Good. You deserve for your voice to be heard. That's the way I see it.
I love it.
Because the message that somebody was telling you is that you need to be quiet.
Exactly.
That's what they were trying to tell you.
Exactly. Well, I wasn't quiet, so it was a waste of time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Exactly.
And that's what I want my own daughter to learn, and all of our daughters, is that they have a voice and they can use it. And it's okay however that voice comes out. It's okay, because that's the way it was meant to be.
Good.
But I also, I do feel on the other end, like we said, you know, that things are being watched. I notice in particular people watch the way I dress. I don't know why, but they watch the way I dress.
They do. They do.
Most of the time it's complimentary. Every once in a while though, I know, for example, recently I was at professional function, everybody says, oh, like you said, a comment that was made to you, same exact thing. You dressed up for this. And I said, well, yes, I did.
It's professional development.
Yeah, and that's what I said. You know what? We dress up for things that are important to us. And today's important to me. And so I dressed up. And then, of course, there's not, somebody understands in the moment, oh, okay. And they say, yeah, that's right. That's right. Every once in a while, though, I remember in particular that day when I had that response, there was nothing left. They turned around and walked away. I said, okay, I'm all right with that. Now they know. Now they know. And that no comments have been made from that person ever since.
Wow.
Ever since. But I do feel that sense of I have to be more, do more, try more. And I wonder to myself, is that the right thing to do? I think most of the time, yes. Right. I'm driven, and I'd rather be too much than not enough. Or what I tell our employees is that I'd always prefer that somebody tells me whoa rather than go.
Exactly.
Like, I'd rather have somebody tell me, slow down a little, it's okay, you're doing a great job, other than, hey, you haven't done enough, like, we gotta move. And so that's something that I've embraced over time. But it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle.
I believe you. I find that most people in education and even in the business arena, they seem to just be strikingly surprised when a woman of color will walk in a room.
Yep.
She's on time. She's confident. She's dressed, raising her hand to answer a question and or add to the environment, and they are just strikingly belligerent by all of it. And we're going there, and we're just going, just like you said, we're not going to try to be impressive. We're just doing what we're called to do.
That's right.
And they are just so intimidated by all of that. And so I would just say to you, just keep doing what you're doing, because you're not doing any of this for any of them who don't want to see you rise to the top.
You're right.
You're doing it just because I said you have this wonderful open door policy, and you're gaining trust, not just with the students, but also with faculty and staff, more importantly also with parents. And so you want to make sure that when we come into, your presence, that we know we're coming into a presence of professionalism all the time. Yes. What are the advantages and disadvantages to code switching?
There's a very close friend of mine who has a similar cultural background to me. We went to high school together and ended up studying the same thing. We're both teachers, and we talk about this often. And being accepted or not. And sometimes a disadvantage, I'd say, to code switching would be I think it's sometimes the internal struggle of feeling like you're accepted by a group of people.
Yeah.
Or like you made a reference to talking white, right? I've heard that many times. And I reconnected also with a cousin recently who told me, gosh, you're the only person who I feel like I can relate to. He said, like, everybody else in the family, they think I want to act white, be white, live around white people. He's like, it's not that. I am who I am.
Exactly.
And I do what I do in my job, in my career. He's very successful in what he does, and he continues to grow. And so for me, I think it's sometimes that struggle of wanting to have that sense of acceptance or belonging to a group of people who you really do. But since you don't act or speak in a certain way, there's always that little bit of space in between. So that's something I say could be viewed as a disadvantage.
Exactly.
But as I've grown in life, I've also found other people who, like you all, are in the same space, right?
Yeah.
And we live in the same space, and we create our own community where we can be a part of all these different places.
Exactly.
And that was something I remember my parents were very intentional about. I remember my dad saying, in particular, we can go to the dive bar and have dinner and feel comfortable, feel like who we are. And we can also go to a fancy restaurant and feel the same way, because you belong in both places and you belong in all places. I remember that distinctly as a child. And that's something that stuck with me, right?
Exactly.
In that I can relate to all sorts of people. And I know you all feel the same way too. You can relate in all different ways to all different kinds of people.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge advantage, is being able to become part of different groups of people.
Exactly. I love that because we kept our children in all of these different cultural spaces when they were growing up. And so even today, their friends, they don't look like us. And that's okay.
All right.
That's okay. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I'm loving it. So what advice would you extend to professionals, educators, who may find themselves in situations where they need to, code switch?
Yes. I would say be the best version of yourself. Try and be the best version and strive to be the best version of yourself. Code switching is natural. As we said at the beginning of our conversation, everyone code switches in some way.